I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And this week is going to be one of the biggest weeks in Old Oscar history countdown. We are in the thick of award season with the Oscar nominations coming up. And later this week, we're going to be getting the BAFTA nominations, the PGAs, the DGAs. Critics' Choice were just last night. I'm going to be reacting that to the top of the show. And then I'm going to give my predictions for 3 separate categories: Best International Feature, Best Visual Effects, and Best Editing. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is break down a different Oscar category and give my predictions on what I think will get nominated. So this week, you can expect 3 things. The first being this video, quick reactions on the Critics' Choice, and then the breaking down of the final 3 categories that I haven't talked about, not including the shorts categories. Then, this Wednesday, I'm going to be breaking down my thoughts on the BAFTA and PGA and DGA nominations and what they mean for the Oscar race going forward. And then finally, at the end of the week, I'm going to be giving my final predictions in all 23 categories and what I think will get nominated at the Oscars. But this is going to be a long video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss all the updates that happen this week and on the upcoming weeks as we go more and more into award season. Make sure that you can check the description as well, where you can jump around the different time codes depending on which part of the video you want to check out. But without further ado, jumping into the top of the show, what happened just last night? The Critics' Choice Awards came out, and frankly, there wasn't a whole lot of surprises, at least from my opinion, that all the front runners in many respects won in the acting races and Best Picture. Similarly, with the outcome of the Golden Globes, Nomadland won for Best Director and Best Picture, clearly cementing itself as the sort of front runner, the clear front runner to win Best Picture as of right now. Now, things may change when we get the Oscar nominations and we actually get to some industry reward aspects to it, but that Nomadland is definitely one of the winners of tonight, with Chloe Zhao, and with getting adapted screenplay, and with getting picture. The Critics' Choice group really is sort of telling, not necessarily in terms of the winners, but who will get nominated in particular, because they nominate so many people, and they have a good sort of general sense of what the movies are, what kind of movies are being well appreciated within members of the Academy. The other winner was Promising Young Woman, after a disappointing showing at the Golden Globes. Here sort of redeems itself, getting in for Carey Mulligan, which I expected, but also sort of surprising, I think, in getting in for Best Original Screenplay and winning that. So Trial of Chicago 7 is sort of tying, it's going either that or Promising Young Woman for Original Screenplay, but this definitely helps Promising Young Woman in terms of maybe getting that Oscar win as well. And then the final winner I want to mention is Maria Bakalova for Borat 2. This supporting actress race is really up in the air. It's important to note that the Critics' Choice is not an industry award group, and not to freak out too much of this, even though Maria Bakalova won here. We're not saying that she's going to win Best Supporting Actress, or to say she may even get nominated still. I think she will, because this will definitely help her chances and shows that there is still more support. But the critics have always liked Maria Bakalova. She's always been a critic's darling, so she gets that support here. That doesn't necessarily mean she's going to get in for the nomination, but I think this definitely helps her chances. But I do want to highlight that the Globes and the Critics' Choice are not industry awards. So you see a lot of people putting Rosamund Pike or Jodie Foster in their predictions, and I want to say slow down, because, you know, the Globes were sort of off kilter. They sometimes like to do their own thing, but someone like Andra Day or whatever is not necessarily even guaranteed for a lock, let alone a win. Rosamund Pike is a similar situation, where she has gotten no industry precursors and has no telling signs as to why she'd get nominated for Best Lead Actress. So don't fall into some of these traps that, oh, Critics' Choice did this and oh, Golden Globes did this. Watch my video later on the week where we actually see some industry awards. We already seen SAG, we're going to see BAFTA, we're going to see PGA, and those are the industry awards, meaning many of the voters within the Producers Guild are also in the Academy, and same thing with BAFTA and DGA, so they'll actually tell us a lot of what the Academy members think, and oftentimes they go with different movies than, say, the Globes or Critics' Choice. Then just a couple quick losers. The Trial of Chicago 7 didn't necessarily totally lose, but it missed out on screenplay, which was disappointing, and then overall missed out on Best Picture. So right now its chances to win, its path to win, it most definitely has to win, I think, Best SAG Ensemble, and then maybe PGA, and then it'll have maybe a strong chance to win Best Picture. Right now it's very divisive. I think we could be going to the Oscars night with a situation where maybe Trial of Chicago 7 wins for Best Ensemble, and then Nomadland wins for DGA and PGA, and we're not exactly sure what to go with. But this lack of critical response, I mean, it did do well in terms of it got an ensemble here, It also got for Best Editing and tied for Sound of Metal, so that was kind of surprising as well, I think. So it has a couple of good things going for it from Critics' Choice, but ultimately missed out on the big awards, which it definitely wanted to win. And then once again, Mank. Wasn't as well nominated as we thought it would be, but still getting no awards at the end of the night aside from production design. It seems like a lot of this sort of what I would consider subcategory movies. So Mank, Maureen's Black Bottom, One Night in Miami. These are all movies that I don't think have a chance at winning Best Picture. However, they will get nominated for Best Picture. They will be well nominated, and every year, oftentimes the Best Picture nominees at least pick up one award, and that seems to be sort of solidifying. So like Mank, for example, seems to be pretty solidified in getting the Production Design Award. Okay, we're going to give it that. Ma Rainey, we're probably going to give it Makeup and Hairstyling, maybe Costume Design too. And then, of course, Chadwick Boseman for Best Lead Actor. And then One Night in Miami, we want to give it an award, we don't know where it's going to go to, so we'll give it to Best Song. I mean, some of these narratives I think are starting to develop, and Critics' Choice really sort of cemented it. And overall, my thoughts were that it was pretty a chalk award show. There was no necessarily huge surprises in any of the acting categories, no ties, and I think the sort of four that we have right now aren't locks, but I think Daniel Kaluuya and Carey Mulligan and Chadwick Boseman are definitely sort of the clear frontrunners in each of their acting categories, and then Best Supporting Actress is still up in the air. So jumping into the Best Editing predictions, my first one is going to be Nomadland. Now, at the top, I just want to mention that, yes, the Ace Eddie Awards will be coming out later this week, and same with BAFTA, and we're going to get to know more about the editing potential nominees, but I still think these videos are helpful as a way just to help you understand the landscape. These are my predictions as of right now, but they're not my final predictions. That may change depending on the Ace Eddie Awards and whatnot, so I think that will be crucial in sort of understanding how the editing award shapes out, but I still think this video will be interesting because this goes in depth on a certain category, where I won't be going in depth in my final category for the 23 nominations. So I still think you can use this video as a way just to understand the landscape a little bit more, even though we don't have some of those guilds. And the first movie I think will get nominated is Nomadland. Now, if you know anything about this category, you know that this category is intrinsically tied to Best Picture. It's more important to get in here, even if you don't win, but not getting in here is actually a really crucial sign that you won't win Best Picture. That oftentimes these 5 nominees, even if you don't win, are Best Picture contenders. There's very rarely a couple cases where Baby Driver or Star Wars: The Force Awakens gets in and they're not Best Picture nominees. And that's not more evident in the past couple of years have really demonstrated this, that if you don't get in for Best Editing, your chances for Best Picture are decreased increasingly so. Last year, what were the 2 frontrunners? 1917 and Parasite. Parasite got nominated for Best Editing, 1917 didn't, went to Parasite. Same thing 2 years ago, Roma or Green Book. Roma surprisingly didn't get in for Best Editing, and Green Book surprisingly did get in for Best Editing. And what did that tell us ultimately at the end of the night? That was a sign showing that Green Book was actually pretty strong. And as a matter of fact, only one movie has won Best Picture without getting nominated for Best Editing in 30 years. So you have to go all the way back to 1981. And that one movie that has won Best Picture that wasn't nominated for Best Editing in the past 30 years, well, that was Birdman, a one-take movie that has very little editing and not a lot of showy editing at all. So it seems like that movie has no editing and therefore wasn't nominated for Best Editing. So I think that'll be a huge bellwether when we come to the Oscar night. If Nomadland misses, if Trial of Chicago 7 misses, do these movies really have a chance at Best Picture? Their chances definitely diminish. But right now I predict both of them to get in for that reason. So my first 2 picks are Nomadland and then Trial of Chicago 7. Nomadland because I think it is the clear frontrunner, and I expect the clear frontrunner to also get nominated for Best Editing. And like I said, my number 2 pick will be The Trial of Chicago 7 for similar reasons. Of course, it also won last night at the Critics' Choice Awards, so that boosts its confidence. So I just think that ultimately, even though maybe not the most showy editing for either one of these movies, I do think that they're so well liked. They've been doing well in terms of getting nominations. They are sort of seen to be the 2 frontrunners that I expect both to get nominated. And if one of them doesn't, I think that'll be a huge blow to whatever movie that happens to, if it does happen at all. Then my third pick, I actually went with News of the World. I think a lot of people have been underestimating News of the World if you haven't been paying close attention. If you've been looking at Critics' Choice and Golden Globe and some of the more flashier awards, you may go, oh, News of the World, it's not even a contender. But if you look at the industry awards, Costume Designers Guild, Production Designers Guild, even Visual Effects, Cinematography, if you look at these guilds, what they've been telling us so far is that News of the World is very well liked. Both Trial of Chicago 7 and News of the World have been doing very well in industry awards, which is what we expect. So the Critics' Choice and the Globes don't really factor in a lot of the sort of below-the-line technical awards like the Oscars do, and these guilds have been telling us that News of the World is very well liked. So particularly from a Best Editing standpoint, we're going to have to see with the Ace Eddie nominations, but I still expect it to get nominated there and also to be a contender in general. This category loves its Best Picture war movies. Now, we don't have a Best Picture war movie this year. We don't really have a war movie in contention. But I think the most war movie type is something like News of the World. It has the most action in it. It has sort of tense moments. It has multiple shootouts in the movie. So it does feel sort of like an action war, male-driven, sort of below-the-line kind of a movie that we've seen done well over and over again. Think of something like Dunkirk. Think of something like Hacksaw Ridge. Even something like 1917 last year. So I think News of the World will succeed off that sort of type of movie that we've seen been doing very well as of recent. And I think it fits into the mold very well, a mold that often gets Best Editing. Now that may be not a lot to sway you, but I think I believe it will get a Best Picture nomination, and if it does get a Best Picture nomination, I do think that and oftentimes this category is filled with 5 Best Picture nominees, and News of the World, out of all of the Best Picture nominees, has the most editing, feels more like an action movie. This is also by William Goldenberg, who has won before and has been nominated 5 times for making movies that are sort of thrilling. I would call them almost thriller, Best Picture, interesting story movies. He's won for Argo. He's been nominated for The Imitation Game, nominated for The Insider. All of these movies have a similar sort of thriller aspect to them, that they're not necessarily over-the-top obvious editing, but they're well-placed and well-engaging. So he's someone that's very well liked within the industry. I expect News of the World to get a Best Picture nominee. Okay, well, Best Editing often nominates Best Picture nominees. Okay, out of all the Best Picture nominees, this has the most editing, which is often a category that we see get often nominated here. So there's a certain style of editing and a certain reputation that this movie has that I think if you've been paying attention, you've been looking closely, this movie has been doing well within the industry awards. So don't forget about it. I think News of the World is going to get in for Best Editing. Then my fourth pick, I went with Promising Young Woman, which is a bit of an outsider pick, but I really believe in the strength of this movie. If you're looking at your Oscar contenders and you go, who can actually win Best Picture? Well, I think it's Trial of Chicago 7, I think it's Nomadland, could very well be Minari as well, but I also think it could be Promising Young Woman. It has the director's support, it has the acting support, it has even screenplay, and if you told me Carey Mulligan won, screenplay won, and then Promising Young Woman won for Best Picture, I wouldn't even bat an eye at that. So it has a strong chance of winning Best Picture. So naturally you go, well, if it has a chance of winning Best Picture, that means it has to get in for Best Editing. I also think Promising Young Woman is different than other Best Picture nominees and fits a certain type of mold of an editing nominee that we've seen recently. I liken it to something like Jojo Rabbit last year, or I, Tonya a couple of years ago, or even something like Black Klansman. These are all Best Picture nominees except for I, Tonya, but that have fast, engaging, entertaining editing to them. I mean, Promising Young Woman is a movie that's not afraid to be bubbly and colorful, but also very entertaining and engaging in the story and how it's unfolding. And I think that's a certain type of movie, even something like Bohemian Rhapsody, that style of editing, that entertaining, fast-paced, sort of always going style of editing is very well appreciated. I mean, there's sort of multiple scenes and flashbacks and memories within the movie as well. So I think they'll appreciate, I think more generally the Promising Young Woman fans will really appreciate this movie and want to nominate in every category, but also I think if it's a mold of the entertaining, exciting, almost comedy-driven in many ways editing of the movie that we've seen get nominated and be appreciated in years past. So I think it sort of fits in the Jojo Rabbit, I, Tonya mold very well. So I expect actually, even though right now it's an outsider, I still expect Promising Young Woman to get nominated. And then my final pick, I went with Mank. This is a movie that has sort of been slipping in terms of its chances of winning Best Picture. However, I likened it early on in the season to something like Roma or The Irishman, and I think that's an apt comparison. This is sort of the Netflix auteur project that is very well respected, but maybe won't be the most well-rewarded movie of the night. but I do think it will be well nominated, including Best Editing. Now, I have it on the fringe right now because I don't think it has a strong chance of winning Best Picture. It doesn't necessarily have flashy editing. There is that sort of screwball comedy kind of a rhythm to the dialogue, and I think it does quite a good job at mixing sort of the flashbacks and sort of the different timelines. There is sort of a complex editing job to it. But I think, more importantly, there's a lot of respect for the movie, particularly within the technical guild and the technical crafts. And also, there's respect behind the editor. So I liken this to someone like The Irishman getting nominated for Best Editing, or even something like Vice, where the movie is sort of a fringe movie. It's not going to win Best Picture. We sort of all know that. But it has a sort of certain level of respect behind it, particularly with the editor. Now, Thelma Schoonmaker is one of the greatest editors of all time, so of course she was going to get nominated for The Irishman. Something like Hank Corwin has been nominated multiple times and has been a veteran within the industry. So I thought that, okay, they would finally reward him for Vice, but he got nominated. I think similar here with Kirk Baxter, the editor of Mank. He's won twice, so they're not waiting to reward him. They really like him. They nominated him for The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which was a bit of a surprise, and then gave him the win for that. And I think more generally, he's someone that is very well respected within the industry. David Fincher's movies are known for having this cold, calculating style of filming, which I think helps with the editing when you think of it, because David Fincher is such a precise filmmaker that you think of the editing, I think, in many ways when you're watching the movie. Like I said, has that sort of combinations of timeline, has the general support of the movie, being well liked and being particularly well respected, which I think will help the movie. But it is a fringe pick as of right now because the movie in general is slipping, and if it misses out on Ace or BAFTA, I could see it sort of maybe falling out of my list. I think it could fall out for my first honorable mention, which is Sound of Metal. Now, this just tied for Best Editing at Critics' Choice Awards. Kirk Baxter, the editor of Mank, mentioned how this was one of his favorite edited movies of the year. Now, a lot of people have maybe likened it in certain ways to Whiplash, where Whiplash got in for Best Sound and had that great sound and won there, and got in for an acting award and got in for Best Editing and won for Best Editing. But what I think Sound of Metal does is a little bit different, because Whiplash is very much an exciting, well edited, but also sort of fastly paced edited movie, and the Sound of Metal is not. Sound of Metal is more traditional in its storytelling. When you think of the editing, you think of the sound design and the subjective camera work, and the editing definitely has a part to do with that. I don't want to undermine it. It was one of my favorite movies of the year, but I don't think it has necessarily the flashy editing that a lot of the Oscar voters are going for. We also don't predict this to be a Best Picture winner, and the fact is, when we look at movies like Whiplash, Baby Driver, Star Wars The Force Awakens, these are exceptions to the rule. Most of the times, 5 out of the 5 nominees for Best Editing are Best Picture nominees. So if I think something like News of the World has a more likely chance of getting in Best Picture, I go with News of the World, then say something like Sound of Metal, which I don't think is going to get in for a Best Picture nomination, and therefore, maybe slips out in this category. It could be sort of a surprise there, because we know it's more generally liked, could get in for Screenplay and 2 acting awards, so that wouldn't be necessarily a surprise there. But I think that it just doesn't have as flashy enough editing to get in for this category. And then my final honorable mention, I went with The Father. This very much plays with perspective and putting you in the mind and the perspective of Anthony Hopkins' character as he's sort of experiencing some dementia and Alzheimer's, and as his mind starts to go, we sort of get that perspective. And there's some unique things that the filmmakers, Florian Zeller, is able to do with camera work and production design, and then the set, but also with the editing and putting us in the shoes of the main character in Anthony Hopkins. So there is some flashy editing in that sense. We also expect it to be a Best Picture nominee, but I think the more generally, the momentum of the movie is lagging behind. That I don't think it's as well respected as a movie like Mank. It doesn't have as much passionate supporters as something like Sound of Metal or even Promising Young Woman. So while it does have unique, interesting editing, it may be a Best Picture nominee. I think it may be falling off the side just because we don't see a lot of passionate votes for it. And it may be a movie that's just coming out a little bit too late. Even though it came out a year ago, more than a year ago, in 2020 Sundance, it was sort of delayed by Fox Searchlight, and maybe surprises and relates to, and connects to the Oscar voters, but right now I sort of have it on the outset. Now jumping into my Best International Feature category, my first pick, I'm going to go with Another Round. Now I want to just note at the top that a movie like Minari, which has showed up at the BAFTA as a film non-English language or a foreign film category in the Golden Globes, is actually not qualifiable for this category, that it will be competing in Best Picture and in many other categories which we expect it to get in. So Minari is not on this list because it doesn't qualify the Oscars requirements, even though it did meet Golden Globes and BAFTA requirements, so just want to note that at the top. And because of that, I think Another Round has a very clear shot of getting nominated, but also winning. It's the only movie that has been getting in pretty much everywhere out of all the international feature categories. So you're looking at BAFTA, you're looking at the Globes and Critics' Choice, and plenty of other individual critics groups. Another Round seems to be the most critically acclaimed movie, aside from Minari, in terms of the international feature category. It is the Danish selection of this year, and historically, this category has been mostly European, that if you're ever unsure of a movie to go with, or there's ever surprise, it's an unknown movie, that's Germany's selection or something like that. That they don't always go sort of full 4 or 5 or 5 out of 5 European, and that's important to note, but more often than not, they do appreciate these sort of experiences in these types of movies. And they've also nominated this director's previous collaboration with Mads Mikkelsen, The Hunt, back in 2012. It was also nominated for an Oscar. So not only has it been winning a lot of these Critics' Choice groups, it has also been nominated in many scenarios, pretty much across the board. It's also a movie with an acclaimed director who's been nominated before, and an actor who is probably the most notable out of all these nominees because he's in Hollywood movies as these supporting roles. Mads Mikkelsen is a sort of more of a household name. It's also worth noting that Thomas Vinterberg was shortlisted at BAFTA for Best Director, as well as being shortlisted for this category. So this movie is one of the more appreciated so far from what we've seen international movies. So lock this in. I'm pretty confident this will still get in for International Feature nominee. Then my second pick is Quo Vadis, Aida, which is Bosnia and Herzegovina's nomination for the year and selection. And this is a movie that maybe you haven't heard of. I was sort of weary to ultimately put it in there when I saw some other people predicting it, but then I looked into it more, and actually there's a lot backing it. There's a lot of stats that indicate that this will be well liked. Once again, the European factor, which I think helps, but more importantly, it's got two things it's going for. First of all, similarly to Thomas Vinterberg for Another Round, this movie was also shortlisted for Best Director, so we know that this movie is very well liked, which is rare to see in an international feature getting at least shortlisted for Best Director. So, only Another Round and this movie were nominated, their directors were nominated in this category, so that's sort of, for what we have so far, which is the industry of the British Academy Film and Television Awards, that is important and relevant, and I think as a strong sign of this movie being more generally well liked. And the second part is that it was selected at TIFF. It was a movie that was shown at TIFF, which I think, from what we've seen so far, the more traditional festival route, movies like Nomadland and One Night in Miami, have been rewarded. Even something like Promising Young Woman, which had a theatrical release first before it was released on video. These movies have been well celebrated. And we know a movie like Green Book, in part, won because it was not a streaming movie for Roma. And I still think there's not a huge streaming bias, and there won't necessarily be one this year, but there is a little bit of that undercurrent that I think it is in terms of a preference of movies that took the TIFF traditional festival path, and I think that will help this movie. Then my third pick is Collective, and I talked about it on last week's video for Best Documentary. I think it will get in for both Best Documentary and Best International Feature, and sort of follow the path that Honeyland did just a couple years ago in being eligible for both categories and getting nominated in both. It's a critically acclaimed movie. It's been getting in a lot of places, Critics' Choice and BAFTA, in terms of both categories, in terms of the long list at least, at the time of filming. Of course, BAFTAs happen tomorrow, so that may change. It works like Citizen 4 or Wiener, these movies that have a sort of unparalleled amount of access. It plays out like a political thriller, so it's a little bit more entertaining. It's a great sort of scenario and a political thriller, which has given it a lot of support from the critics, but I think it's also a really terrific movie, and I think that it will resonate because it's part populist and part entertaining, but also has that critical support and also has political implications, and it's a different kind of movie, but it's still entertaining. So I think there's a lot of sort of additional factors that will help this movie get nominated. Then my fourth pick, I went with Two of Us, which is the French selection this year, and every year there seems to be sort of a unknown, maybe sweeter kind of a very European kind of a movie that gets nominated, that is sort of off the wall. And I think this year is the Two of Us, because it has actually been well appreciated. I mean, it got nominated at the Golden Globe, so I think it's gotten a little bit more exposure because of that. And it's well acclaimed in terms of critical acclaim and Rotten Tomatoes. But I think in this year in particular, in 2020, where maybe there's less of an incentive to watch all these movies. If you're a voter and you have to watch all these selections for foreign films, you may not want to watch a movie from a smaller country, but you're more inclined to watch a movie from France. And I think this movie, which is sort of sweeping and romantic about two lesbian lovers over the years, will resonate with some of the more European members of the Academy, because the film is sort of very European in its approach to sort of the relationships and the dialogue. But also, in terms of being sort of a sweet, romantic movie, I think that will sort of help and differentiates itself from the other movies. And I think in a year like this, where maybe not everyone watches all the movies, they'll just go, oh yeah, France, they're probably the most well-respected film country, aside from the United States, in the world. So I think those sort of, the voters will go, okay, it's France, there's a quality there that I expect, and I like it, and it was sweet, and okay, give it to two of us. But then for my final pick, I went with I'm No Longer Here, which is the Mexican entry in this year's Oscars. And the reason why I did this is because I was thinking about it, and should I go The Mole Agent or Dear Comrades, and maybe another pick that someone else has. But the truth is that they very rarely nominate 5 European films or 5 Asian films. There is a European, I think, bias within this category, but there's still usually 3 or 4 to 5 are European. That's usually 1 or 2 movies that are from either Asia or the Middle East that get nominated. So I think it was important to, in this final slot, and when you look at your final slots, to pick something that is not European, because it helps. When you're watching all of these movies, if you see a lot of European movies in a row, you may get confused between the Danish, the Swedish, and the Norwegian entries of the year. But you may not get confused between the Danish entry and the Mexican entry. And a movie like this, I'm No Longer Here, is very much interested in its location. It's about a teenage boy who gets involved with a local gang cartel and sort of roams the streets of Mexico City and seeing different parts of Mexico City that's not always sort of popularized in modern media. So it's very much a cultural destination kind of a movie, and seeing these parts of Mexico City shooting on location. I think it's also more sort of broadly entertaining and more of a traditional kind of a Hollywood path, which has done well in this category before. And finally, it's being distributed by Netflix. So this is a movie that has a Netflix boost, has a Netflix push. And I think this and Sun and a couple other movies, they'll be sort of campaigning for it. But I think ultimately, I'm No Longer Here has the best chance. And Netflix does do well in this category with the shorts, but also with this category as well. So I don't want to sort of knock out someone like Netflix. And I do want to see them represented, because right now it's the only movie I have that will get in from Netflix. Then with my honorable mentions, my first one is La Llorona, which is the Guatemalan entry this year, which is a very unique movie that could get in, but I think people are maybe a little bit overestimating it because of its Golden Globe nomination. First of all, it's a horror movie, which I think just knocks out a lot of people, and a lot of people don't like horror movies and won't even watch horror movies, so they won't even vote for it. I think that sort of hurts its movie's chances, because we haven't really seen horror movies ever do well at the Oscars, but nor really have they ever done well in this category. It's kind of a rarity in that sense. It's also being distributed and exclusive to the Shudder platform, which is a horror streaming service, which is becoming increasingly popular, specifically with horror fans, but that just makes another sort of additional challenge for, I think, a lot of people. That you would say in one part, oh, it's Shudder, it's their only movie, they really want to get nominated, they're going to really push hard. That's partly true, but also it's true that it's going to be harder to see this movie, and it's not going to have as much recognition because of that. So there's a couple things that just goes against it. It is Guatemalan, so it's not European, so it could fit in terms of that final slot if you're so inclined to do so. But I feel like it is still a movie that has a couple things just going against it that will hurt ultimately its Oscar chances. And then my final pick, I went with A Sun, which is a Taiwanese selection this year, and also distributed by Netflix, and has a lot of critical support as well. But the reason why I left it off is because it hasn't been getting anything. And it does have Netflix behind it. It is Taiwanese, and maybe with a boom of Asian cinema in recent years with Parasite and Minari, it would get nominated in that sense. But I just think it's maybe not as well seen as people think it is, or as well liked, because we have no precursors which indicate that it is. So this could be sort of a spoiler that comes in at the very end, and really the only reason I have it is because I've seen a couple other people put it really high in their predictions. So maybe they're hearing something that I'm not in terms of the buzz around this movie, and it could sort of benefit from that Asian cinema kind of representation. But right now I have to leave it off because there's literally nothing that has shown me that this should be well liked, aside from Netflix and maybe some tangential Asian cinema boom stuff. But I'm not really totally buying that. Now, the final category I'm going to be talking about tonight is Best Visual Effects. We had the Visual Effects Society nominations a few days ago now, so we know a little bit more of the landscape as of right now. And my first pick is The Midnight Sky. Now, when we're looking at the Best Visual Effects, there's a couple of precursors and indicators that we can look at. First of all, I mentioned the Visual Effects Society. That's one. We want to look at the BAFTA long list, which we're going to be, and the BAFTA nominations, which we're going to be seeing later in the week, and of course, Critics' Choice. But also, like many of the below-the-line categories, in these categories, there are certain types of movies that if you're different, that often helps in many ways rather than just being a movie that's well liked. And I think The Midnight Sky fits into a lot of that. It got nominated for Critics' Choice. It made the BAFTA long list. It made the sort of main category at VES being effects in a photoreal feature. It's also a movie that we know is in contention for something like score and is sort of in the conversation within these industry awards. So we know people have been seeing it, so that's important. It's also a movie that has a big sci-fi budget. It's not super sci-fi-y, it's definitely grounded, which has helped movies like Interstellar or First Man win these awards and also get nominated. It's once again a sci-fi movie, which is different than some of the other nominees and makes it unique and interesting. This sort of duality of the on the ground, but also within the space and these floating sequences, which are very impressive. So the fact that it is a unique movie in the sense that it's only a sci-fi movie in this sort of contention. It's also a movie that is well supported by Netflix. It's also a movie that's being well seen. It's also a movie that's been nominated everywhere. It seems to be sort of like a lock that The Midnight Sky should get in here, and I expect it to maybe not win for Best Visual Effects, but at least get nominated, and I feel pretty confident in that. And then my second pick is also a movie that I feel confident will get nominated, maybe not necessarily win, but that's Tenet. Now, Tenet doesn't have a lot of visual effects. It has a lot of practical effects, which will definitely appeal to a certain a member of the Academy. I mean, at the end of the day, they didn't do a lot of visual effects, but they literally crashed a plane into a building. I mean, that's an effect shot. So maybe there's not a lot of appreciation there, but there is a certain appreciation within the community that I think will be well respected. A Tenet, I do think, will get a couple of these technical nominations because of the budget, because of the fact that it's an original movie from Christopher Nolan, who has a pedigree at the Oscars. It was a little disappointing that it only got one Visual Effects Society nomination, but that being said, it did get the main one, which is important, so I still expect Tenet to sort of be a lock because of some of it's the only sort of practical effects kind of a movie of this category. Christopher Nolan's movies have done historically very well in this category as well, and I expect Tenet to get nominated because of that. And then my third pick, I went with Mank. Similarly to Tenet, it's not obvious visual effects, but there is a lot of visual effects in the sense of set extending and things like that. Once again, backed by Netflix. And when I looked at my top 5, I go, okay, maybe I'll go with, Birds of Prey, maybe I'll go with Love and Monsters. But then I looked at it and I go, well, I'm missing, my top 5 was missing a Best Picture contender. And oftentimes, if you look at this category, the Best Picture contender, or Best Picture nominee in this case, always gets nominated. So I don't think there's going to be 5 nominees and none of them are going to be a Best Picture contender. That will be sort of odd for me to see. And Mank's the really only one that has a very real shot at getting Best Picture, but also a very real shot at getting nominated here. So while it's sort of traditional in its sort of set extending and whatnot, I still think that it will be nominated just based on the fact that it is a movie with decent enough visual effects and interesting visual effects in its sort of building of its sort of classic Hollywood style, but also in the fact that it is a Best Picture movie and it should be very well liked. And once again, got the precursors, got Critics' Choice Awards, got the sort of most critical category at the Visual Effects Society in a photoreal feature, so that was important for it there. So I think Mank still sort of is maybe not a lock for this category, but a solid bet. Maybe another solid bet is my fourth pick is Welcome to Chechnya, which has been gaining a lot of steam as of recently. It was shortlisted for both documentary, but also for Best Visual Effects, and I think it has a higher chance of getting it for visual effects than it does for documentary. It uses visual effects in a unique, innovative way, using deepfake technology to obscure the members of the LGBT community and their sort of identities in a unique way. So it's using visual effects in a different way that we really haven't seen before. It's using it for a social issue issue, which I think will really connect with the voters. A movie that we know is well liked within the Academy, making it in both shortlists. It's a documentary, so it's different, so you may go, oh, that's a little bit odd, but I think with its recent sort of positive showing at the Visual Effects Bake Off, the social issue side of it, the fact that we know it's being well seen and well regarded, it may be a movie that you feel not confident going into the awards because it wasn't shortlisted for BAFTA, so you may go, I don't have a lot of proof. It did get VES, which was important, but there's not anything else. I still think you should feel confident in Welcome to Chechnya because it has so many things going for it, and its uniqueness and its innovativeness and its for a social issue, and we know it's well seen, particularly within the Academy. I think those things will really be important in getting it that nomination. And then my fifth one, I went with a bit of a surprise, a bit of an outsider pick, but I went with the one and only Ivan. This is a movie that I thought would definitely be almost a slam dunk for a nomination, yet has been disappointing everywhere. Didn't get in for Critics' Choice, only got one nomination at VES and wasn't a big important one, so that concerns me. But over the years, when we see these movies that have really sort of unique, identifiable characters with great visual effects, those do well. Something like Christopher Robin comes to mind, or of course the Planet of the Apes movies. The one and only Ivan has a CG gorilla character at the heart of the movie. We also know this movie was shortlisted for Best Original Song. It's backed by Disney, so we know it has some sort of campaign behind it, and we know it has been seen because it got shortlisted in both categories. I'm going out of a bit of a limb here, but I think the fact that it's such a different kind of a visual effect, because it has that sort of singular CGI character and how they have to blend that and interact with the characters. And I think if you think that works, then you'll be very well appreciative of it and will want to nominate it. It also depends on how much people have seen the movie, so I'm a little bit skeptical as of it right now, but I still kind of feel confident in a gut feeling that this is the kind of movie that would get nominated for Best Visual Effects. Then my first honorable mention, I went with Soul. Now, animated movies are always super hard to predict in this category. Sometimes they're Kubo and the Two Strings and they get in. Other times, something like Inside Out will miss. And they're hard to judge because Soul was the most nominated movie at the Visual Effects Society. So you go, oh, Lee, of course it's going to get nominated, right? Yeah, but it was in a different category. It was in the animated category, only competing with animated movies. So you go, oh, okay, that's kind of hard to judge. We know it's a well-liked movie. We expect it to get multiple nominations, but will the Visual Effects Society really sort of connect and go, well, it's an animated movie. How much visual effects are there? What's that level of visual effects? I mean, Kubo and the Two Strings makes a little bit more sense because it's actually a real stop-motion claymation thing that they did, but Soul's in the computer, so how much of that is actually visual effects, it's hard to judge as well because it's animated. Right now I have it on the outside because of that, but we know it's well liked. We know it could be a screenplay contender and a score and things like that, so I wouldn't be surprised if it got in this category, but more generally I'm hesitant of animated films in general to want to nominate it. And then my final honorable nomination, I went with Mulan. Now, this is a movie that logically should get in the sense that it made Critics' Choice, it made the BAFTA long list, and it got in at multiple nominations at VES. But I still think it's very vulnerable. First of all, we know the movie isn't necessarily well liked. It wasn't necessarily a huge box office success because it wasn't released that way. It was released through Disney, but the sort of reports we heard, it wasn't a huge success for them. The movie was critically panned. It also didn't get in for a key category at the VES Awards. It got 4 nominees, I believe, but it's all supporting, not a main category, which I think is maybe indicative. Disney movies don't necessarily always do well here. Beauty and the Beast didn't get nominated. Christopher Robin did, but that was kind of like a long shot outsider chance anyways. And I think Mulan so far has been showing us that, yeah, it should get nominated, but it has sort of been getting a lot of nominations, but not sort of crucial nominations. And I don't think it has the passion that something like maybe even something like the one and only Ivan did. It had sort of an okay showing at the most recent Visual Effects Bake Off, which is an important element too. And I just think that it sort of doesn't have a lot of momentum, doesn't have a lot of passion going for it. So I'm skeptical of the movie in general getting that nomination. Even though it has the precursors, it could be a movie that just sort of slips because it just hasn't gained a lot of passion over this awards industry sort of season. But that being said, it's maybe more of the smarter pick, but you have to go for your gut in some of these situations. So I went with something like the one and only Ivan. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on all these categories, your thoughts on the Critics' Choice. Were you happy to see Carey Mulligan win? Were you upset to see something like Trial of Chicago 7 get miss out on Best Picture, for example? Let me know in the comments down below. I love to hear them. Once again, subscribe. Stay tuned to the channel. Wednesday, I'm going to be giving my reactions to BAFTA, PGA, and DJ nominations. And then later this week, my predictions for all 23 categories, all those nominations. All coming up later in the week. Subscribe to the channel. That would really help the video. But that's about it, guys. Until next time, stay tuned.